All right, I've got 8 o'clock, or the hour, I guess, over here. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. If you are looking for making it sound good, you are in the right place. My name is Amy Ogden, and I'll be moderating tonight. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer and a co-editor at Translunar Travelers Lounge, which is a magazine of fun and optimistic speculative fiction. Christine, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Christine Benedictson is what it says on the bottom. I write as MC Benedictson, um, and I publish a lot of different things. I write poetry as well as fiction, short fiction as well as long fiction. I have my debut novel coming out in 2024, was awarded the Orison Fiction Prize, and then I'm also a freelance editor. And was an English teacher for like 15 years. So,
And Valerie?
Yeah, so I'm Valerie Valdez, she, her pronouns. I am the author of the Chilling Effect trilogy and the forthcoming Where Peace is Lost space fantasy novel. I also have short fiction in a lot of places, including most recently in Uncanny Magazine, as well as a bunch of poetry there. And I am one of the co-editors of Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast.
All right. I thought we would go into questions. We'll also have, after we talk about some discussion topics, some slides comparing some before and after of prose to make it sound good. We'll get to that later, and then I'll save some time at the end for questions from the audience, and you can put those in the chat or in the Discord room for Houdini. I will be checking both of those. So whichever is easier for you to drop questions in, I will check both. And the first question I wanted to broach with both of you is that I know that some writers prefer drafting and some prefer editing. So before we get into making it sound good, which side of that debate do you fall on? Let's go the opposite way this time. So starting with Valerie.
Okay, so am I strange if I say I like both? I am a plotter or a planner, depending on how you arrange that your definitions of that. So I also love pre-writing, and I love making the pitch, the synopsis, the outline, the notes document, all of that stuff. I really love doing all of it. And so the writing side of it is great because then all of that prep work becomes words on the page, and it's like, yay, I'm getting it out of here, and it's going on to there, and it's delightful. And then it's more tangible, just sort of like if you're taking all of your ingredients and turning them into a cake, and then you have a cake. But then the editing part is good because then once you have that cake, keep going on the metaphor, then you have to decorate it, right? You want to put the frosting on, you want to add fruits, nuts, embellishments, stuff in the inside, pudding, whatever it is that makes it extra appealing and delicious. And so editing it's more of a refinement process, obviously, than simply decorating a thing and gilding the lily. But there is that sense of taking the thing that you've already made and making it even a better and more final version of itself. And so I find both sides of it very satisfying.
and I'll agree that I also like both things, but I don't have as delicious a metaphor to talk about it. But no, I agree that for me, they both have different rewards. And as Valerie was saying, like all parts of that process of writing and even publishing have their rewards. I find that I actually like to have different projects at different stages simultaneously because of course, I love it all. But if I'm writing and I get burned out on a story that I'm just like, I don't know what happens next, I need to let this sit and stew a little bit, then I can turn to a project that I've already drafted and dive into the editing, and that spurs something new. I can also do that sometimes on my own projects. If I'm reading back, I'm kind of jumping back into a project. I'll read back a couple pages or something, and that editing does actually sort of start to spur new ideas for me as well. So I find them very closely connected. But it's important to me that I have the opportunity to flee from one to the other when I need to.
As somebody who strongly prefers drafting, it's nice to hear from a different side. So part of making it sound good is, of course, deciding what good means for a particular story. How do you find yourself choosing the voice for a particular piece, and how do you evaluate whether what you're writing fits with that voice? Christine, this time?
Sure, it's like ping pong. This is fun. So yeah, I think for me, like that can be a process of experimentation, and it happens a lot of different ways. Like I don't think that it always happens the same way. There is not a formula for it, at least for me. I think of a story I was working on recently that I was telling it very straight, right? Like very like, here we go. Here is a third person narrator describing the events. And it was working fine, right? Like there were things happening that were interesting and compelling and pulling me on. Um, but I just got curious and I just got playful and I said, I'm going to take this story and turn it into a speech that is being given. And then suddenly I needed that voice to be a character, and that narrator was no longer detached, but actually present. And it brought out angles in the story I hadn't anticipated, and I ended up really liking it. Those experiments don't always work. But to the question of like when I think it actually is working, and I find this with my editing as well, that it becomes easy when I feel like, okay, it's clicking, um, is almost the same feeling as getting a song stuck in your head, where you're like, okay, this is just like part of this same rhythm and cadence. And like, yes, you can have points where, like, depending on what kind of song you're writing, where suddenly we just do a left turn and we have an orchestra in the middle of, what was a techno song, or, whatever. Sure, fine. But whatever that song is that's stuck in your head, does it fit, right? And so I really do, and I have this with my novel, I have it with short stories, even poems are the same way, of like there's a musicality to it that just begins to have an internal consistency.
Yeah, I think it is something that over time you develop, and I will be gauche and quote Detective Pikachu. You can feel it in your jellies. Like it just feels correct. And that is an extremely unuseful way to construct it, but you do sort of know it when it happens. You feel a satisfaction that you are doing the thing in the right way. You feel comfortable doing it. I won't say it necessarily is easy, but it feels natural, I guess, is one way to think about it. When the thing that you're doing feels like a thing that is coming out of you naturally rather than a thing that you're sort of forcing out of you, I think that is usually a good sign of it. But going back to the initial thought of like how do you choose the voice for a particular piece, for me, I tend to ascribe to the rule of POV fixes everything. And so once you have figured out the POV of the story, which you may do through iteration, through testing, through trying different stuff, but for me, usually what I'll do is I'll ask myself, okay, which POV would work based on genre conventions, based on the tone I'm trying to achieve, based on the theme, but most importantly, for me, it's about information drip. How am I going to withhold and convey information to the reader? Because that POV element will then inform the voice that you're trying to choose. How are the breadcrumbs going to be laid out? And so you think about like, how do I want the reader to feel? What kinds of relationships do I want them to have with the story? Do I want it to be very close and intimate? Do I want it to have a lot of interiority? Do I want a character with a very kind of poetic voice, or are they very matter of fact? And so again, POV like is the one that usually guides me toward voice, because if a character is very brash and sarcastic, then it lends towards having a narratorial voice, or if it's first person, the character voice that is that. And also playing with POV in terms of what the character's thinking versus what the character's saying can be really useful. So that's another consideration. So to me, voice is very integrally linked to POV, but also just if it is distant third person, how much do I want the language to be almost a participatory experience. How chunky do I want it? How much do I want the reader to have to chew on the things that I'm writing versus it being very smooth and seamless and just easily received, I guess.
How often would either of you say that you get halfway into a story or even all the way through a draft before you realize that the voice that you had set out is not the right one, or the POV is not the right one for what you're trying to do?
I mean, how I don't have stats on it, but yeah, I mean, like it certainly happens, right? Um, but I feel like so much of this, figuring out the voice, figuring out whether it's working or not, it feels a little bit like dating, right? Where you're like, I like this person, I'm hanging out with them, right? I like the voice of this story. But something's just not quite right, and it has to be right, right? Like I need to commit to it. And if you get to that point of like needing to commit and you cannot commit, you're like, nope, I cannot spend the rest of my life with this story as it is. And then you got to push and see where the levers are. What can you change? And right, and that's point of view, or it's diction, or it's, what is it? Is it a lie? Like you got to add something in there that's more compelling. You don't want to add lies to your actual relationships, but within the story, right? Like play with those levers and see, can you fix this relationship, or do you need to like pick this voice out, and date a little bit more. But yeah, I don't think that a full overhaul on voice happens more than half the time. I would say it's a smaller percentage than that.
Yeah, and this may make me a weirdo, and I'm okay with that. I don't want to be like the spiders Jorg of POV stuff. But for me, I usually find that by the first couple of paragraphs, I know. So very quickly, I will have a feel for, I have done this wrong and it's not working. And that's potentially because I do so much prep work typically. For a short story, not so much. And the thing about a short story for me, or a poem, is that I often will have first lines kind of come to me and I will go from there, and that sets the tone for it. And certainly by the end, I may come back and revise the first line and whatever, but I iterate that a lot in sort of on the front end. And so for me, I tend to know very quickly if a thing is not working the way that I want it to. And often then the POV of that kind of comes to me in that first line, where it's like, this first line was delivered to my psyche in first person, and therefore this is what I am doing. I'm writing this first person narrative for this person. Or like, I have a story that was second person, and it just was, this is a second person story. And I knew immediately when I started writing that I wanted to be a second person story because of the thematic content, because of the character. And it just, for me, within the first few paragraphs, usually at most, I know whether I've erred.
All right, we will not call you spiders, Valerie. We promise. What were so yeah, we've talked a little bit about the feeling and the vibes of trying to find that right voice. What I want to talk a little bit about, what's your process? What are the steps you take for making a story sound good? Whether there's specific exercises you do, specific prep work, reading it aloud, or having or anything else on that front. I forget where we started. I think start with Valerie this time.
I know, it's like with only two of us, you get lost. Not a complaint, merely a note. For me, my process, so I don't read my work aloud, but I do read it very slowly and listen to it in my head, which in some ways is kind of the same thing. It's not the same thing, but for me, it works, because I do. I try to just do the same, but I've often written in places where saying things out loud is not acceptable, and so I don't have the option basically, and I've just gotten into that routine, I guess. But when I'm reading it out loud in my head, I try to think about where I naturally pause, for example. Do I put a comma there? Is the sentence too long? Does it need to be cut in half and become multiple sentences? What's the pacing of this scene? Is it moving the way that I want it to? Is it too slow? Is it too fast? How much alliteration have I stacked? Like, as I'm listening to myself read it to myself in my head, am I stumbling? If I tried to say this out loud, would I hate me? Are there specific words I could use instead of the ones that I already did to either make it sound more musical or more smooth, or to break up the monotony? Have I used my repetition well? Has it gotten tedious? Because I think repetition is a great tool. It's a poetic tool, and it sometimes gets underused, and it sometimes just gets used wrong by me. And then I usually will just go sentence by sentence, start at the beginning and just work my way through the whole thing, chapter by chapter, section by section. For the voices, am I being consistent to the characters? Like, do people talk like that? There are so many books where you will find people saying things in dialogue that I'm like, nobody says that. And there is certainly a line in fiction between realism and reality plus, which is what I try to aim for. It's like, maybe people don't talk like this, but they talk close to this, and this is the cool version of how people talk. And so that is the thing I think about. And then would the character even say that is another one. Is there a better analogy, a metaphor they might use? Something that does world building, for example, as well as character building. And then cussing. Cussing is super important to me. Cussing has a very particular rhythm that you got to get down, in my opinion. So that one is huge for me.
Yeah, I think so I am absolutely a read aloud person in like the worst way for my friends and loved ones because my poor husband will have to, like, if I'm working on a new project, every dinner is just like he eats and I read to him. Or I would like call my sister up and leave her a chain of voicemails. It's just me reading my story to her. So yeah, like it definitely for me, it helps to have it aloud in my voice. But the danger is with reading it aloud is that you can also kind of perform it and make it sound better than it may if you don't have that advantage of somebody who isn't already inside of your head. One of the ways I get around that is actually using the read aloud tool in Word, but other programs will have this where it is literally the robot voice reading it to me. And so I do not get to put in any of the dramatic flair, and hearing it turned around that way can really dramatically impact basically anything that changes it. And so I do this because the other thing that I can do is change the margins. If I put in giant margins and read it and the line is breaking in a new place, because I do, also write poetry, that impacts how I read it, like where the line break comes. So I will play with all of these things to basically in an effort to alienate the story from myself. And I think that's why we also recommend like giving some space to a story. And because we need it to be strange, we need it to be a little bit like, oh yeah, did I write that? And then we start to hear it differently, and we hear the things that either are delightful little surprises, oh yeah, I like that, or those things that you do, okay, I hate myself a little bit when I hear this read aloud. Yeah.
I just want to very quickly add that absolutely, like, controlling your sentence structure, your syntax, your punctuation, and also paragraph breaks in the same way as line breaks is very crucial to controlling to the extent possible, because I mean you have no control. Once the thing is gone, it is out of your hands and the reader will read it how they want. But those are your tools for controlling how a reader reads the story to the extent that you can. And so be aware of those. Use them. Use paragraph breaks to slow a thing down. Use paragraph breaks to force focus on the first sentence of the next paragraph, or leave them with a very strong outro to the previous paragraph, or what have you. Just think about the ways that people will read a paragraph. They tend to skim middle sentences more than first and last sentences. That is just a weird natural habit that people often have. And so use that to your advantage, and use that to make sure that you're controlling the thing. And also to reinforce what Christine said, when I was taking TV writing back in college days, many years ago, that was something that was absolutely drilled into us, that you cannot expect the people who are reading the scripts to be reading them in the voices of the actors that are performing them. Because when you're doing TV writing, you're writing spec scripts that are typically for shows that are on the air and have actors that people can envision, whatever. But you have to write the thing without any of that. If a thing, especially if it's going to be funny, if it's going to be dramatic, poignant, whatever, it has to be intrinsically that, because especially with a novel where every reader is going to have their own idea of the voices of the characters, you have to have the things be sufficient in themselves rather than relying on the reading that you would be giving it.
Yeah, I would say too, as you're thinking about, for those folks who are writers, right? Like, you're thinking about what you need to do for your editing process. It depends so much on who you are as a writer and what your tendencies are, right? So if you are someone who likes to read out loud, you might be more tempted to kind of make it an actable story than it would otherwise be. If you're someone like me, I have never ever in my life struggled to meet a word count. So I know that I overwrite, right? And I will say things more than once in multiple different ways. And so one of the things that I need to do before, and I might expand again later, is give myself a crunched word count. Arbitrary sometimes, right? Doesn't actually need, nobody's saying it has to be under 5,000 words or whatever, but I am going to crunch this story down and pull out the chaff. And I'm not talking like Hemingway, I have to get it down to brief sentences. That's not my style. It's not everybody's style. But take out anything that is not necessary, that is not actually part of that song, as it were, right? And so by knowing myself as a writer, I can turn the screws on to that part of me that is a little bit wayward, and then I can expand later if I need to, if there's something missing.
Sort of along similar lines, and we had a question about this in the chat, and one that I wanted to get to. I think we've all found ourselves in the circumstances of disagreeing with a piece of feedback. So how do you evaluate as the writer whether a piece of external feedback aligns with your intentions for a story and its voice? Or if you also want to get into it on the editorial side, how do you try to think about giving feedback in a way that gets at what the author is trying to do and not your own, how you would have written the story? I think we're starting with Christine this time.
Yeah, this is one of the trickier things when you disagree with your readers, because as I think Valerie had said, once it's out of your hands, it's out of your hands, right? It does belong to them. That story, you have done your part. But while you're still in the revision process and you're sending it to readers for feedback, or editors, right? And this relationship we have with editing clients as well. I think one of the best ways to go at it is, do not assume that your readers or your editor is stupid. Do not assume that they are just that they do not have any idea what you're trying to do. Go in with a little bit of like giving the benefit of the doubt. And it's very tempting emotionally, I think, to be like, oh, what do they know? They don't get it. But assume they get some of it or something, and look for the reason why they're saying what they're saying. And it might not be, their suggestion may not be what you want. And often, and I think readers sometimes, editors are paid to give you suggestions sometimes, but they don't always. Sometimes they give you questions. Readers will give you suggestions that may not be helpful, but listen to why they're giving you that suggestion. What is it that gave them the stumble? And are you okay with with someone stumbling there or going off in that direction. You cannot control that, but just I think that really my thought is trust them at least a little bit. But at the same time, trust yourself, because I mean, again, this is knowing yourself as a writer. It can be tempting for some folks to be like, everybody knows better than me. I need somebody to tell me what to do, and then I'll just do it. But you have to trust yourself, right? Until you really feel sure that you know what the story is trying to do. And I think that's one of the best things that can come out of these editing or beta reading cycles, is getting a very clear sense of what you want this story to do. I have had a story once that came back, and the comments that someone said is like, wow, this, I can try to remember the exact comment they said, but it was essentially saying, this story is too X. And I'm like, oh, no. You don't understand. Like, that's the whole point of the story. They're like, it feels a little bit like this. And I'm like, no, it needs to be like that, the whole thing. And what I got wrong was I didn't make that clear enough that this is the whole story. And so although they wanted me to take that out, I'm like, just kidding. I'm going to go completely off the deep end. But I trusted that they saw something real there, that it wasn't working.
Yeah, 100%. Like, as writer and as editor, when I'm looking at advice, when I'm giving it, when I'm receiving it, is the advice making the story a better version of itself? That is, like, is this the platonic ideal? Am I working towards that? The platonic ideal of this story. How much does the advice change the core of the story, or attempt to change the core of the story? Is it changing essential parts of the thing as opposed to manifesting them more strongly, bringing them out more accurately? And it's tough because sometimes your vision as the author may in fact be somehow flawed. There are places where you may need to make a change because a thing would be harmful even if you didn't intend it that way. And so that's one thing to think about. In if you realize based on feedback, oh, I was actually doing a bad, whoopsies, fix it. Like, don't sit there and wallow, just take the note and make it better. And intention has nothing to do with it. This is a thing I yell at my children all the time. I don't care what you intended to do. The thing that you did is this. It's like, oh, I hit my sister, but it was an accident. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you intended. It matters what is being received. And so when you're getting that advice, like Christine just said, it's like, you want the thing that you intend to be the thing that is received to the extent possible. And so that is when you take notes, is when you are getting closer to manifesting the thing that you're trying to do. And so it's about improving what's there, not twisting it to some editorial vision, not twisting it to satisfy the readers. You really ultimately are trying to satisfy yourself. Not that you don't want to also satisfy your readers, because of course otherwise you're just journaling, and that's okay too. If you're writing only for yourself, that's cool. But you do want to keep in mind just like, what are they receiving from the messages that you're sending? And if you are presented with an idea that does change the story in some core way, but you like it and you think it's super great, and actually yes, go for it. I mean, you are under no obligation to take those kinds of big changes into account, but if it does align with your goals in some way, and the new direction is more fun or dramatic or scary or whatever, then yeah, just go with it. If it basically, it just, if you don't like a thing, you don't have to do it, but think about it first, because the knee-jerk reaction can often be, I don't like this, I don't like thing. And so just tell yourself, okay, and then come back to it. Just let it percolate a little before you go all out to rejecting any kind of feedback.
And I think that kind of goes into the next question on my list, which is that a lot of writers do find that process of editing and receiving feedback and making revisions to be an emotionally challenging part of the process. If that describes you, how do you manage the emotion involved with that? This time it's back to Valerie first.
I hate it. No, I have big like RSV, rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD. And so anytime that I get feedback, I am like, I have failed. I'm a failure as a person. So even though I enjoy editing, it is challenging because almost intrinsically the first step of editing is admitting that you didn't do the thing perfectly the first time. It's terrible. And that can be really hard to, for most of us, maybe. I don't know if it's probably not just me, but it can be very hard to accept that without feeling that sense of failure. And so starting with the attitude, talking to yourself about it, of course it's not perfect. That's normal. That's fine. But I'm gonna make it perfect. But not perfect, but make it better. Make it um a better version
Perfecter.
of it. Perfect-er, yeah, because it's like you're never gonna make it perfect. You can hope that you're gonna make it perfect, but ultimately the best time to find a thing that you want to change is when you have the hard copy in your hand and you're like, well, there's nothing I can do about that now. But focus on that future feeling of like satisfaction. You're back to the cake. You're looking at this naked cake and you're imagining how beautiful it will be when it is complete and how delicious it will be when you taste it. But instead it's writing things. And so for me, managing the emotions is not just that personal, like giving myself the self-talk. Having friends who can also give you the talk is very helpful because sharing those feelings to a certain extent, I think as writers we have them, and so the more that you can be like, oh no, I'm in the place where my brain weasels are very loud and they're eating all of my brain cheese, and then your friends can just be like, I will escort them to a lovely farm upstate and the brain weasels are now gone. But also just giving yourself small rewards along the way can be helpful. I like chocolate and cookies, but you can reward yourself with whatever you want: stickers, pens. It's up to you. Whatever your budget and your preferences allow.
I think that feeling of hurt when we get edits back, even really helpful, spot on edits, is really common. Not everybody has it. That is true. But I think a lot of people have it in some degree and some people have it in extreme degree, right? And again, there is like being a writer is a huge amount of self-realization and managing yourself. But there are also like ways to seek out relationships with other folks, as Valerie was talking, like having your people there to like do the aftercare for you when you receive your edits. That's lovely. But there is also, I think, the opportunity to seek out the people who are in your writing group, your critique group. If you have the opportunity to establish a relationship with an editor, to talk about that, actually acknowledge that this is an emotional process. As an editor, and I think this comes from my spending 15 years as an English teacher, where like I recognize that especially, teenagers are people. I just want you to know this. They're just slightly younger people. And so the feelings that they have are the feelings that we have too. We have just managed to like put narratives around them. But when I give feedback to a high schooler, it doesn't matter if I am like, oh, this is beautiful. This is one. They're like, head down, you hated it. I'm so terrible at this. So I have to do the work of establishing trust with them. I have to do the work of saying, look, I see what you're doing and I think it's brilliant and I want to help you get there. So let's look at this together. And I do that not quite with the same hand holding that I, do with my clients. They might be weirded out, but I do try to say explicitly, I really respect the work that you're doing here. My goal is always to get your voice and your vision foremost in this project. And if any of my comments don't do that, please ask about why I'm doing. Let's have this conversation. There, of course, are relationships between editors and writers that are more contentious and more haughty and on both sides, and that is really hard to get work done that way. So I actually make it a point to have conversations about the emotional stuff with the people that I'm working with. And that's not always possible, but it certainly does help. And then for me, yes, doing the whole like give it some space, feel the feelings, let them get out there. And then I will also kind of break the work down a little bit. I just got, edits back on my novel. So it's like 3 pages of comments and then all the marginal. If I try to do that all at once, I am going to be a puddle of self-loathing, and we do not need that, right? So I literally go one paragraph at a time in the large piece, process it, think about it, figure out what is useful to me and what is not. And then I go through one chapter at a time, you know, not trying to just do it all at once. And it's slow, but it's managing what's real, and our emotions are real. And they are a big part of what we're doing.
I will add also that it's very easy to focus on the bad stuff, and your brain will super do that to you. Your brain sometimes is a terrible, terrible negger, and so you will receive the good stuff. If you have a compliment sandwich, right? You will receive the good parts of it, but your brain will just yeet them into the void and entirely focus on every negative thing that has been said. And so a thing you can try to do is focus on, like, force yourself to focus on the nice things that the editor has said, or the beta reader or whoever, so that you don't let your brain neg you into submission. It's not cool. Your brain will do it. I mean, my brain will do it. Maybe yours won't. Again, there are some people that seem to just have, I don't know, some sort of immense force field mentally, which I envy. But just, if you, and tell your friends also, be like, this is the nice stuff that was said to me, so that when I forget that these nice parts were said to me, you can remind me that nice parts were said to me, so that it's not just me wallowing. And so, but forcing yourself to focus on that a little bit can be helpful.
We're at 35 over the hour now, so I do want to make sure we get to the before and after slides. So if you want to take over the screen, Christine, you are welcome to do that and show us how you went from start to finish on those.
Okay. Gotta go find my share screen. All right, does that look okay to you? All right, so I'm going to just show you one paragraph, and I think showing this kind of in action can elucidate some of these steps that happen. This is from a story of mine, The Ones Who Run, that was published in the Hopper in 2021. Here's the original paragraph, and I'll read it for you and then show you what I did to it in my own editing before sending it in, and what it would look like when it was submitted, and then what I did with the editor at the magazine. So the original paragraph. Outside, wading through the dense late summer grass, Michelle will stumble on the remains of the fence, the scrub having overtaken the field. The cedars will look mature to their inexpert eyes. Except for their swatting at bugs and the skyscraping engine of a 737 crossing to Chicago, it will be still. They will smell the fallow earth exhaling in the heat. So regardless of what your feelings were, mine were that it needed to be changed. And so these are the changes that I made between the draft and the submission to this paragraph. One of the things I changed was the verb tense. I was playing around with it. It was one of those experimenting things, putting it into a future tense. Ultimately, it wasn't necessary for the story, and it worked better without it. So I went ahead and found all of those changes. And again, when you're in the editing, being meticulous is very helpful. Search and replace is beautiful for many things, or at least a find tool can help you if you have a pattern that you're changing someone's name, you're changing verb tense. Some of those can help you, but you might miss things with something like verb tense, so you have to go through and see line by line what needs to change. For me, the sounding good is also about like how it's playing out in my head, and so I made some changes to blocking. Changed Michelle being the ones to, stumbling, to D, so that then she could call her daughter over. And so that was a specific change. Yep, got her already. And then there's really just kind of the poetry of things. So I didn't like the dense late summer grass. It was too many kind of strong single sound, single syllable words, the dense late summer grass. the dense summer grass sounded a little bit more kind of going back and forth, 1, 2, 1. I didn't like then kind of pulling that down, getting the remains. I changed it to remnants because everything had gotten sort of terser now, because Michelle will stumble on the remains, changing to something much more curt and sharp. Dee's foot caught in the remnants of the fence. At that remains just wasn't working as well. I thought remnants is sharper and has those kind of shorter syllables to play with. So that was just a sound change. Oh yeah, took that one. And then changing, they will smell the fallow earth exhaling in the heat, changing this to in the heat of the afternoon, so that I'm making everything kind of more terse and sharp at the beginning and letting it expand at the end was another thing. Sensory detail, then adding the fence growing right into the cedar, adding some detail about the scent of the earth breath, all of that. And then this line, which had been kind of sticking out at me, right? The cedars looking mature to their inexpert eyes, what didn't feel clear. I didn't feel like it was working. So I added the trees in the scrubby field looked mature, though they were younger than Michelle. Ultimately, I'm glad this doesn't actually change all the way to the end. It doesn't stick around all the way to the end, but that was my attempt to try to make this a little bit more clear by adding some detail and putting them into the time frame of the story. And oh yes, there's my circle. I was playing with animations, can you tell? So here's the paragraph revised, and this is as it was submitted, for better or for worse. I mean, for better, because it did get published, but outside, wading through the dense summer grass, Dee's foot caught in the remnants of the fence. Its far end had grown right into a cedar. She called her daughter to see it. To their inexpert eyes, the trees in the scrubby field looked mature, though they were younger than Michelle. Except for their swatting at the bugs and the skyscraping engine of the 737 crossing to Chicago, all was still. That's the same. In the heat of the afternoon, the fallow earth exhaled its scented breath. When I got edits back from Becca Bevins at the Hopper, the edits that I got were not kind of change this line, add this period. It wasn't so much copy editing as it was questions. And I really appreciated that style from her, because she was asking things, could this be, and sometimes she would have some examples, but mostly it was highlighting this feels a little obscure to me. I'm not quite seeing it. This is an opportunity to change. And so when I say that it was edited by, it was really edited with, and it felt collaborative. And I really appreciated the way, as we were talking, that I felt her getting what I was trying to do and pointing me, opening up little doors and avenues and nudging me along that path to say, go ahead and try that. So one of the things that she asked for were more specifics. She wanted to see more of those kind of sensory details, not just the summer grass, but what is in the summer grass. So we have now arching foxtail seed heads and half wilted horseweed, which does elongate, kind of pulls back from that terse rhythm that I had at the beginning. But that kind of comes and goes sometimes, and I could live with it. I liked it. The scented breath, she wanted to know what was on the scent. And so the scent of pollen and rot adds more specificity, adds more kind of thematic information as well. Clarifying information, this whole tree, the cedars looking young, did end up adding length, which, as is not uncommon for me. This is a flash piece, so adding length is always a little tricky, but it was necessary, right? So now we're kind of getting into the story a little bit more, telling the story. Oh yes, this used to be the field. So yeah, these must have come after. They were younger than they looked, but they're invaders. So they kind of take on their own story, because the single line just was not giving enough information to make those justify their position there in the story. And this is then how it was published. So you can see that there's like all of these different layers, all of these different rounds of from where it started to where it ended. Now the heart of it's the same. What's happening, the basic action, none of that changed. And it was really just about listening to it, about listening to my editor who had questions, who was left saying, I'm not really sure what to do with this. And then going through, and it really is, it's iterative. You go through it and you go through it and you go through it. Now, if this were not yet published, would I probably keep editing it? Yes, but I would probably keep editing my birth certificate if someone let me. Like, I wouldn't, I can never leave anything alone until someone takes it out of my little grasping hands. So
All right.
this is where it is.
Yes. All right. I do want to get to at least one or two audience questions here at the end. I thought this is a good one to get into. When is it good to argue with the spelling and grammar checking, like Word or your nitpicky grammar person that critiques your story? When do you ignore good grammar or correct grammar to make it sound good? Valerie, you want to go first on this one?
Whatever it does not impact the understanding. That's basically, if you are not harming the reader's ability to comprehend the thing that you are saying, then yeah, let it go. And definitely don't rely exclusively on programs like that, because they will make such weird, like, that's why copy editors have jobs.
Yeah, I don't have much to add other than know the rules so you can break the rules.
Another one I saw, do you struggle with self-confidence? And if so, how did you learn to recognize and trust in your own voice and your truth, especially when combining with the feedback that you get? Christine, this time, I think.
Oh, yeah, I mean, for sure, the self-confidence. I think that it helps to like have multiple different stories of how I feel about this story, where it's going. So I don't need it to be like, this is the one that's going to win all the prizes. I'm like, but I can't live with it if I change this thing, then that's important, right? So if I can just trust that it will find its reader, that there's someone else out there who wants to read this kind of story that I want to write, but then also recognize that the editing and the revision process is part of what makes a good writer a good writer. Nobody just cranks it out perfect the first time. So that's not the expectation.
There's a webcomic of a dude yelling at the sky, "I don't like the thing!" And then an angel descends from heaven and hands him a note that says, "Okay." That's pretty much what I do. My brain is constantly going, "I don't like the thing." And then the other part of my brain just goes, "Okay." And I keep working anyway. And that's essentially my method for coping. It's maybe not the most ideal strategy. And again, talking it out with friends can be helpful. Beta readers can be helpful to help you kind of cut through those feelings, because if a reader likes it, then it's probably pretty okay. And whatever emotions that you have are related to your own internal, again, dysphoria of just, I'm going to be rejected, people are going to hate me, everything's going to be terrible. And those feelings are, if you have them already, they're probably never going to go away. And so it's just about inventing coping strategies that work for you personally. And every person's coping strategies are going to be different. And for me, again, it's just, I try to get to a point where I can ignore the thing and keep working anyway. And just acknowledging that, like, yes, those feelings exist and they're not going to change. And I still have deadlines.
Um, my chat scrolled, sorry. Yeah, oh, this one. Do you do anything different when editing someone else's work than when you edit your own in terms of flow or voice or sound? Valerie, this time first.
I will try to very briefly say, usually I will have a lighter touch with someone else's work than with my own. With mine, I am willing to just wrangle entire sentences and paragraphs into different locations, cut liberally, add liberally. But with someone else's work, I will tend, as Christine pointed out, to ask questions more than simply, manhandle the darn thing. Sometimes I will make suggestions about particular points of punctuation based on how I'm reading a thing, but there's always that sense, and I always try to communicate that sense, that this is merely a suggestion, and please feel free to discard it if it is not conforming to your vision.
Yeah, I would echo that. That sounds right to me. It also depends on what I'm being paid to do, right? Like, what is the agreement between us? I am very much consider myself an extension of the writer as an editor. Well, I guess that's true for myself as well, but yeah, but I also feel like I'm much more like cheerleader role as editor than I am for myself. But yes, there's also really big differences depending on the type of editing. I do a lot of academic editing, and that's very, very different from fiction.
All right, and I think we're in our last minute here, so if you want to say real quick where else we can find you on the internet, and then we'll wrap things up.
Benedictson.com.
You can hit me at valerievaldez.com. I'm Valerie Valdez on Twitter for now, Valerie Valdez author on Instagram. And if you like watching people stream video games, I am on Twitch at The Kids Are Asleep.
All right. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me tonight or this afternoon. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I hope you are all ready to go out there and make it sound real good. Have a good rest of your convention.
Where can we find you, Amy?
Oh, I'm at Amy_Ogden on Twitter, and you can also check out translunartravelerslounge.com. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good time period.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Valerie.